Hello students, it is now time for chapter 6. We are moving right along. So today we are going to be talking about energy and metabolism and enzymes, all of which are very important for not only human bodies but animals and plants as well, because we all need energy and we all need these enzymes to help us get that energy. So just kind of a quick outline, cells and the flow of energy, metabolic reactions, metabolic pathways and enzymes, and oxidation reduction reactions. So first of all, energy. Energy is the ability to do work or bring about a change. Energy is, we could have kinetic energy, which is energy in motion. So energy that is actively being used, energy that is continuously working. And mechanical energy is a good example of something that can be created by like water going over a waterfall, for instance. Potential energy is something has the potential to have energy. A ball sitting on top of a hill has the potential to have energy if it starts to roll down the hill. But since it's not rolling down the hill right away, it's not actually expending energy. It just has potential for that energy. Then we've got chemical energy, which is in the form of like food that we eat. So there's many different kinds of energy. There's light energy, heat energy, sound energy. If you've ever been next to a big speaker and the speaker vibrates and you kind of feel that vibration and the bass, that's a type of energy too. So there's energy in many forms, but the only energy that we can really use is chemical energy. So we have to figure out how to get that chemical energy, and there is a very cool process that we use to do that. So first of all energy comes from the sun. There's always an exception to the rule. There is a couple weird bacterias that are in the bottom of the ocean that actually will get energy from chemicals. They go through chemosynthesis. But for the vast majority of organisms, we get our energy from the sun. Now, we as people don't get our energy from the suns, but plants do, and we get energy from the plants. Now, an important thing to look at this chart, and we'll probably talk about this later on, is that at every level, energy is lost as heat. We can't really use heat energy. That's not something our body can use. We want that chemical energy, and that chemical energy does get passed on, but not as much. And so energy is lost. Every level you move up that food chain, energy is going to be lost. It's also why we have to get hungry. If we just replenished energy, we wouldn't get hungry. We get hungry because we need more. So there's the law of conservation of energy, that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but can be changed from one form to another. So this is like photosynthesis, taking light energy and changing it into chemical energy. Not created, not destroyed, just changed into something else. Much of that energy, again, is changed into heat and lost as heat. Then there's the law of entropy. When energy is changed from one form to another, there is a loss of energy that is available to do work. If a plant has 100% of the energy from light and we eat that plant, we only gain 10% of the energy that that plant had available. 90% of that energy is lost to the environment. So we can't get 100% that is available from the plant. It's just not possible. That's the law of entropy. So here we can see a very simplified version of this. The sun produces solar energy. The plant, along with using water and carbon dioxide, is a type of producer. It's going to use its chloroplast to produce carbohydrates. So that's really the whole point of photosynthesis, is producing carbohydrates. But at the same time, heat is also going to be produced. So that energy, some of it is going to be lost as heat. Now our body will use that carbohydrate that we get from the plant, and we will use it to make energy happen, and also heat, again, is going to be a byproduct of that, along with the work that our body is doing. So energy takes place in all cells, and every process in cells increases the total entropy in the universe. Therefore, less energy is available to do work, useful work. Most of this is lost as heat. Organisms called producers use energy to create organized structures in biological molecules. Basically, it's taking light and making sugar. That's what photosynthetic producers do. They take light, and through this amazing process called photosynthesis, which we'll learn about, it is able to make sugars. Organisms that consume this, we are taking the sugars from the plants and turning it into an energy that we can use. And that process is called cellular respiration. So photosynthesis creates the sugars, cellular respiration takes the sugars and turns it into ATP. Living organisms depend on a constant supply of solar energy. We cannot make energy ourselves. We have to eat the energy from other animals or plants that have already got the energy. Everything needs the sun. So we can see entropy in a cell when we have a glucose molecule, C6H12O6, that's glucose. It gets broken down into a series of water molecules and carbon dioxide. So we take in sugar and we release carbon dioxide when we breathe, and water is a waste product as well. That's what we see happening in the metabolic processes that our body uses. So unequal distribution of hydrogen ions to an equal distribution. When we are trying to figure out how to get energy, a lot of it is based on hydrogen on one side and then trying to balance that hydrogen out. We try to get a hydrogen concentration on one side, and then eventually the cell is going to try and balance that out, and our body is able to create energy. And we'll get to that with photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So metabolism is the sum of cellular reactions or cellular chemical reactions in a cell. It's how our body takes the materials that we put into it and breaks it down to give us the energy that we need. So if you ever hear of somebody who has a high metabolism, basically it's just meaning that they can break down their food very quickly and there's very little left over and they have a lot of energy. Now anytime we're looking at a reaction in chemical form, then we're looking at something called reactants and products. Reactants are what go in to the reaction. Products are what is left over or is created. Reactants go in, products come out. There is free energy, which is the amount of energy available to perform the work, and this is often created or used depending on which reaction we're looking at. Exergonic reactions release energy. This is when energy gets released. These occur spontaneously. Endergonic reactions are trying to save energy and requires an energy input. So these are not spontaneous, and endergonic means the products have more free energy than the reactants, and that means that we have somehow made energy, or not really made it because it can't be created or destroyed. We've somehow changed it into a more usable form, and it has required like an input. So we talked about ATP and how ATP is our energy source. Well, we have created a bond, and we mentioned before how bonds store energy. That's basically what we've done with an endergonic reaction. So ATP again, adenosine triphosphate. We are going to come back to this over and over again because this is what our cell uses in order to get the energy that we need. Now, when energy is used up, the cell has taken a phosphate off because triphosphate means 3. And when a phosphate is removed, that means energy is used, and we have something left over called adenosine diphosphate. Adenosine diphosphate, di for 2. That means one phosphate's been removed, that bond has been broken, and energy has been used. If we want to save energy, we put that phosphate back on, we create that bond, and then we're saving some energy for later. ATP, think of it as a rechargeable battery. All battery charged up. Battery has been depleted and needs to be charged again by putting that phosphate back on. ATP is adenine, ribose, which is a sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. And it's that last phosphate group that we're paying attention to. ATP is then used to drive an endergonic reaction when that phosphate is added. So here we see the ATP. Here's our adenosine, here's our ribose, and then here is our phosphate group. And this bond is the one we're focusing on. We break this bond, energy is created. Then that phosphate can go away, but if we reattach this phosphate, then energy is restored and our battery is charged back up. So we go from triphosphate to diphosphate and back and forth again. This is showing the process at work. So we have our ATP which is going to have energy that is used. And as the energy is used, that phosphate is removed. An exergonic reaction, energy is expended out, exer out. And so now we've got adenosine diphosphate plus that extra phosphate hanging out over there. We can add that phosphate back on, put a little bit of energy in there, and create ATP again. Energy is needing to go in for this, for an endergonic reaction, so we have to figure out how to get that energy in, usually in the form of cellular respiration, and that's going to make us some more ATP. All right, so here we can see muscle contraction. Muscle contracts by a series of actin and myosin filaments which grab and hold on to each other. We've got some ATP on the side there. It's going to attach. Energy has been used, so that has now made ADP plus a phosphate, and that is going to signal the muscle to grab here and kind of pull it over, and pulling it over creates the muscle contraction. So ATP was used in that case. Now, for a reaction, we look at it as this is creating this, and so on, until eventually we get to our end product. And G in this case is the end product. A is the initial, B, C, D, E, and F are intermediates, so A got changed to this, B gets changed to this changes, this changes, this changes, but we finally get to what we want by the time we get to G. That's basically a simplified version of how reactions are taking place. They're linked in this metabolic pathway where think of it as like a chain reaction, a series of dominoes. One thing has to occur before the next thing can occur. One domino has to fall, which knocks down the next domino. That's what we see in a metabolic pathway. Now, reactants of an enzymatically catalyzed reaction are called substrates. So when we're looking at an enzyme, enzymes are proteins that play a specific role. They act as a catalyst. That means they cause something to happen. Enzymes have a material that bonds with them, and this material that bonds with them, they're able to change it. An enzyme accelerates it and makes it happen faster. Enzymes are reaction specific. They only happen for specific reactions. If we wanted to bind two things together, but they are not specific to that enzyme, they're not going to fit. It's like a lock and a key. You can shove as many locks as you want, or many keys as you want into a lock, but only the right key is going to open the door. Enzymes will only work for specific reactions, and their substrate is the material that is being reacted, and reactions are going to occur at the enzyme. Enzymes make these reactions happen quicker. Enzymes themselves are not affected by the reaction. They can be used over and over and over. Now, again, enzymes will eventually break down and die, but they can be used many times before that happens. The site that the reaction actually takes place is called the active site, and this is like the surface where the action happens, the surface where the reaction is occurring. And the induced fit model is an idea that it's like a puzzle piece. You can try and shove puzzle pieces together, but unless it fits, it's not going to work. The enzymes have to match up with the substrate at the active site, otherwise the reaction is not going to work. There should be a picture coming up soon that will kind of help explain this. Now, degradation, enzyme complexes with a single substrate molecule, and that single molecule is broken into two products. So that's degrading it, starting as one, breaking it into two. But you can have a reaction that's the opposite, where you have two substrates that are coming in and being joined together to make one. And in that case, it's called synthesis. Synthesis means to create something. So when you have two enzymes coming together to make one of something, that's synthesis. When you have one that is being broken into two, that's degradation. Here's how this process worked. We've got our enzyme. Okay, we have the substrate, which is going to come and it fits. It fits into this piece like a puzzle piece. The reaction takes place on the enzyme. And in this case, because it's degradation, the one substrate breaks into two products. The enzyme is left unchanged. It can do the reaction over and over again. Here's the synthesis one. We have two products we have two substrates. You're going to make your product later. Two substrates that come to the enzyme at the active site. They join because they fit together like a puzzle piece. The reaction takes place. The enzyme, left unchanged, can cause another reaction to happen. And the product is going to be the result of those two combining into one. Degradation, 1 into 2. Synthesis, 2 into 1. Now there's also something called energy activation. This activation energy is really important for an enzyme to operate. Think of it as like this. We talked about that ball sitting on top of the hill. Well, in order for the ball to get rolling, you need to put a little bit of energy into it. And one of the ways you can do that is by just giving it a little tap. If you just tapped it enough, it would go down that hill. Or you could give it a very massive kick and send it down that hill flying. So there are variations in the amount of energy that a reaction needs to get started. Sometimes it requires a lot of energy, sometimes not as much. But the main idea here is that in order for a reaction to happen, it can't just happen automatically. It's got to have some kind of activation energy to get it started. That ball is not going to roll down the hill by itself unless you put that ball into motion somehow by contributing some other outside energy. So enzymes operate by lowering the activation energy. Instead of having to kick that ball really hard, it lets you give just like a little tap and the reaction gets going. You want the reaction to get to that part where it's rolling down the hill. That's when things are happening. That's when that chain of events is taking place. With those dominoes we talked about before, once you click over that first domino, then the dominoes fall. But the activation energy is the energy needed to give over that first domino and make that first one fall. And enzymes make it so that you don't have to expend very much. You can just expend a little bit. And without an enzyme, it would take too much for our bodies to be able to function the way that they're supposed to. This is a really great graph. So think of this as this is the energy needed to get the ball rolling. So this is the initial, I'm going to kick the ball really hard in order to get that ball rolling down the hill. Or you could tap the ball and only use a little bit of energy and still get the ball rolling down the hill and still get to that same result, which is what we are wanting, is that the product that we're wanting here. We want this end result, but we have to get over this hump to get there. It costs our body a lot if we have to expend a great deal of energy every time we need a reaction to work. But it only costs a little bit if we're using an enzyme. And so there is a difference here of a massive amount of energy that we are saving by using that enzyme. Also, it causes the reaction to happen much quicker. Enzymes cause reactions to happen quicker, and it lowers the energy necessary for them to take place. There's a little problem with these amazing enzymes, though. They require very specific conditions in order to operate. If those conditions are not met, then the enzyme is going to start to break down, which is not something we want to happen. Comes back to that homeostasis again. Our bodies need homeostasis. So, if the pH level is too acidic or too basic, if the temperature is too high or too low, if the salt is too salty or not salty enough, then we're going to have issues with the enzymes not operating correctly. This, again, I think I've mentioned it before, is why if you have a really high fever, like 104, 105, your body is not happy. And the first thing the doctor's going to try and do is get that temperature down quick, even if it results in putting you in an ice bath to lower your temperature. Because the priority there is to make your body back in that optimal temperature range so that your enzymes do not start to break down. This is called denature. If the enzymes and proteins start to, and remember, enzymes are a type of protein. If they start to denature, then that means your body isn't going to have enough energy to do the reactions that's necessary. The reactions are not going to happen fast enough, and you're going to go into organ failure, and your tissues are going to start dying. That's how important these enzymes are, and that's why it's important for our bodies to maintain homeostasis. Also the cause of heat stroke. Our body gets too hot, we get too dehydrated, homeostasis is not in balance, enzymes are not going to be able to react. Our body can't keep up with the demands we're placing on it. So here's an example of two different types of materials, pepsin and trypsin. And pepsin operates more effectively at a pH of 2, which is highly acidic. Trypsin operates more effectively at a pH of about 8.5, which is neutral to basic. So after it gets to, you can see about 3, it's starting to break down significantly, so a pH of 3. Pepsin is only going to operate sufficiently at these conditions. Trypsin is only going to operate sufficiently at these conditions. So how does this work? Pepsin works great in your stomach where there is a high acid to break down materials. Trypsin is going to work better in your digestive tract, like the small intestines and the large intestines, specifically the small intestines, because it works better in a more basic condition. As the acidic materials leave the stomach, buffers are added to decrease and neutralize those acids, and then trypsin can come into play and continue to break down the nutrients. So, body temperature regulation can be done in ectothermic animals, but it is limited. That's why many ectothermic animals will go into hibernation during winter because the colder temperatures are not ideal for their bodies. And so they will sleep through the winter time and wake back up in the summertime. Some animals, like endothermic ones, can regulate their body temperature by having blubber or warm fur or warm feathers to help regulate their temperature because, again, it's all about keeping that temperature at a stable level. So here's an example of enzyme reaction as temperature relating to temperatures. There is a specific enzyme that causes dark coloration in areas that are cooler. So in these types of cats, for instance, the lighter coloration is for warmer body temperatures. So this is why these types of cats will have darker ears, darker faces, darker feet and tails because their body temperature is lower in those areas. In the higher areas where the temperature is warmer, their fur is of a lighter color. Now, interesting enough, there was an experiment that was done with rabbits that had a similar effect. They shaved the poor rabbit and they put an ice pack on his body so that it was always cold. So typically this part would be white on a rabbit too, some species of rabbits. But they shaved it and they put an ice pack, and then they managed to make those enzymes active, and then it had a little black spot there because the black or the dark colored enzymes were activated by the colder temperature. So enzyme cofactors and coenzymes, cells can regulate the presence or absence of an enzyme. They can say for an enzyme to start or for an enzyme to stop. Cells can regulate the concentration if there are more enzymes in a certain area or less. And cells can activate or deactivate the enzymes depending on their needs. If we didn't eat, we probably don't need our digestive enzymes working, so we can shut those off for now. If we are sleeping, we probably don't need all of our muscle enzymes working, so we can shut off our muscles for now. So our body has a lot of control over enzyme use. Now, enzyme cofactors require molecules required to activate an enzyme. So the cofactors activate an enzyme, causing a reaction to happen. And we have several types of cofactors. FAD, NAD+, and NADP+ are cofactors. Some of these are used in cellular respiration, the first two, and the third is in photosynthesis. You can think of the P for plants, so photosynthesis. Coenzymes are non-protein organic molecules. These are like vitamins and minerals and small organic compounds required in the diet in order to make these coenzymes. So vitamins are necessary in order for the coenzymes to be made correctly. So this is why having a balanced diet is really helpful and important. All right, so here we can see the activation site and the cofactor is going to say, yes, let's let this reaction take place. So here, we can bind a substrate to this enzyme because the cofactor is saying, yes, let's let this take place and let's activate that active site. Now, a substance known as an inhibitor binds to an enzyme and decreases its activity. So we can say, okay, let's stop this. And competitive inhibition is the substrate and the inhibitor are both able to bind to the active site and they compete with one another. The products form only when the substrate binds to the active site. So we can't have products unless there's binding taking place at that active site. So if we have a competitive inhibition, then the substrate and the inhibitor are both trying to bind to that site. Now we also have non-competitive inhibition, and the inhibitor does not bind it to the active site, but at an allosteric or other site. And this allosteric site basically changes the shape of the enzyme. And so the substrate cannot bind because the shape is the wrong shape. So we have one where they're kind of fighting to get in there, and one's like, I got there first, now you can't bind. And then we have another one that's like, no, we're just going to bind to the allosteric portion, and now it's changed the shape completely. So here we can see the allosteric site. It's activating it, saying, hey, we want to, we're making it so that you can't bind. This shape cannot fit in this spot. It has changed the shape of the enzyme. Then, if that is removed, we've got our active site open. We now can have the process take place and get our end result, and the allosteric cannot bind to that. So again, it's a changing the shape of the enzyme. All right, so oxidation reduction reactions, we often abbreviate it as redox reactions. It's just easier to say redox. Electrons pass from one molecule to another. In this case, we're trying to get molecules or electrons to pass from one area to another, and oftentimes this involves energy. If you think back to our bonding, anytime we're talking about electrons or valence shells or bonding, all of that comes back to energy. Oxidation is the loss of an electron. Reduction is the gain of an electron. Both of them will take place at the same time, and one molecule accepts and the other gives it up. And this oxidation reduction is allowing for this energy to change place. In the production of NaCl, sodium chloride, which is salt, sodium is oxidized and chlorine is reduced, and oxidation is loss again and reduction is gain. Which sounds kind of counterintuitive because when you think of reduction, you think of loss, but it's the opposite. Reduction, you are gaining. So here we can see photosynthesis and cellular respiration. These two equations are vital for when we talk about cellular respiration and photosynthesis, and you will see these come up over and over again. The way you can read this is carbon dioxide and water. Plants absorb carbon dioxide, plants take in water, and energy from the sun. This is sun energy. They combine all of these things in a series of reactions to produce sugar and oxygen. Now remember, energy is changing forms, but these materials just get switched around. We have 6 carbon here. We have 6 carbon here. We have 6 oxygen plus 12 oxygen, 18 oxygen here. We're going to have the same amount of oxygen here. We have 12 hydrogen here, 12 hydrogen here. It's going to be the same. Almost think of this as like an equal sign if you think back to your math days. Now, what's also very interesting is that all you have to do is flip this and you get cellular respiration. With cellular respiration, we are taking glucose or the sugar from plants and we are using oxygen that we're breathing in. We're producing carbon dioxide and we're producing water. And this also is how we get our energy. Important thing to realize is that even though plants are going through photosynthesis, all they're really making is sugar. They still go through cellular respiration too, because they're going to need ATP energy for other parts of their body to work. If a plant did not go through cellular respiration as well, it would not have mitochondria, because this is taking place in the mitochondria. And because plant cells do have mitochondria, they are also going through cellular respiration. So chloroplast and photosynthesis, the chloroplasts are basically going to capture the energy from the sun and turn it into chemical energy eventually, because first it's going to turn it into sugar. It's also using carbon dioxide and water in order to make that original sugar. Hydrogen atoms are transferred from water to carbon dioxide as glucose forms. So basically, we've got the main components. In carbon dioxide and water, we've got the main components we need to make a sugar. We just have to break the carbon dioxide and water down and rearrange it in order to get that sugar. Carbon dioxide has been reduced and water is oxidized, and the energy that is needed to change this up is provided by solar energy. Living organism can oxidize glucose in mitochondria. As I was saying before, this is where the glucose gets broken down and energy in the form of ATP can be created. So in mitochondria, it's oxidizing those carbohydrates and making ATP. So as the mitochondria does its thing, then energy will be built in the form of ATP. Those phosphates are added on to that ADP, and that energy is being stored, that battery is being charged, and this takes place in the mitochondria through the process of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration consumes oxygen. We need oxygen in order to breathe, which means plants need a small amount of oxygen in order to do cellular respiration. And the equation is the opposite of photosynthesis. Glucose has been oxidized and oxygen has been reduced. When oxygen gains hydrogen ions, it becomes water, H2O. So the extra hydrogens are rearranged onto oxygen to create water, which is a byproduct of cellular respiration. That energy that is formed is stored in ATP. So this is a very, very simplified version of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. You have the sunlight coming into the chloroplast, because that is where photosynthesis takes place. Chloroplast is going to produce heat as a byproduct, but also carbohydrates and oxygen. The carbohydrates and oxygen are going to go into the mitochondria for cellular respiration. The mitochondria is, of course, going to produce heat, but it's also going to produce energy in the form of ATP and carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide and water both go back to the chloroplast to aid in the process of photosynthesis. It looks like we rely on plants and plants rely on us, but in truth, plants don't need us as much as we need them. We need plants more. Plants do need us to a degree, but not nearly as much as we need them. So photosynthesis and cellular respiration form a cycle. The products of one become the reactants of the other, and both organelles, both the chloroplast and the mitochondria, are involved in this redox cycle where we are creating and we are degrading, and carbon dioxide is reduced in photosynthesis and carbohydrates is oxidized in cellular respiration. So it's really just a back and forth. Eventually it becomes unusable heat when ATP is used by the cell. We form that ATP, we can use that. When we use up that ATP, it's heat, and we got to go back and either, in our case, eat more food, or in the plant's case, go through photosynthesis again. All right, so that's all for our chapter 6, and we will be starting with chapter 7 next. Again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you guys. Bye.